Over the years, a lot of people have asked me about that guitar on the cover of Speed Mechanics, that red Kramer, assuming, of course, it's my guitar, but actually it wasn't. I never played that guitar. I played a Jackson Soloist on the recording of Speed Mechanics. So I'm going to talk about both guitars, actually. I want to talk about the cover, what happened there, and I also want to talk about and show you the Jackson Soloist I used. When it came to cover design, all the covers were done by a guy named Richard Slater at Hal Leonard. He's the art director, and he's a very talented guy and did just loads of work. I mean, he was doing dozens every month. He was churning out dozens of these covers, and he knew what he was doing. So he had this good working relationship with the guys over at a store called Casio Interstate Music. It was a big guitar store, hundreds of guitars, and he'd borrow a couple that would look really nice to get the kind of vibe he wanted in these covers. And of course, I would also bring my stuff to the photo shoot, and we would use whatever really looked best, whatever would create the impact we wanted. Well, the guitar, my main guitar at the time, was this Jackson Soloist, which I really loved. Still have it. I'm going to show it to you in a minute. But it was this kind of mud brown. Not the most appealing color, and certainly not something that's going to pop on the cover of something. So it was like, okay, that is not going to work. And he pulls up this Kramer, nice looking guitar, red, and we got this red and black thing going on. And of course, I love those colors, the power colors, red and black, always have. And I thought, okay, this is cool. So I did the photo shoot with that guitar, which wasn't mine. The face was mine, the hair was mine, and the jacket. So here it is, the Jackson Soloist that I used on Speed Mechanics. I bought this guitar in, I think, '88, and like I said, it was this mud brown color. I didn't really care much about what it looked like. I think I paid $750 for it. It was used at the time, and I think they were going for like $1,500 new, so the price was right. And I just played the out of this thing for well over a decade. In fact, I wore the frets down almost to the fretboard. First thing I did when I got the guitar is I replaced the pickup. Now, I was a big Randy Rhoads fan at the time, really into all that stuff and learning his stuff, and I learned that on his guitars he was using Seymour Duncan pickups, so I looked into Seymour Duncan. There was really only two main replacement pickup companies at the time. It was Seymour Duncan and DiMarzio, and DiMarzio I think was the bigger company, but I tried some pickups, some DiMarzio pickups at one point, or played some guitars with them, and at least those pickups, those models at the time I played them, didn't impress me. They seemed, they were high gain, but they were kind of fuzzy toned, and I didn't really care for that. I liked, more of an organic, smooth impact, and for some reason, the Seymour Duncan pickups, at least that I played at the time, seemed to have more of that. So I put in a Duncan Distortion pickup here in the lead position, and it really has a nice, smooth, kind of creamy, high gain tone. So I really liked that, but it's also got a lot of punch and a lot of power, and I really like the pick attack when it has a lot of punch and some low end in it. This guitar also has, of course, the two single coil pickups. I really hate the sound of a humbucker in the neck position. The tone that happens when you have a lot of bass in the sound pre-distortion, that ends up making the super blurry, fat, kind of nasty sound, which I just despise that sound. I like low end in the tone, but I want a tight, punchy low end. I don't want that kind of blurry, fat sound that happens when you take a humbucker in the neck position. I think that neck humbucker is, pretty much useless unless maybe you have coil taps or something. If you put single coils in the neck position, now that's a tone, that's kind of nice, because in that neck position there's a little bit more gain. The signal is stronger, so even though the pickup is maybe a bit weaker because it's a single coil, it still has a lot of smooth overdrive. And when the window, or like what the pickup hears, with a single coil pickup, it's a narrower window. It's hearing a smaller portion of the string. And in the neck position, that just adds a clarity to it that you don't get out of a humbucker. A humbucker, by its nature, is kind of this, wider, blurrier tone. So that works fine, of course, and it's great for high gain, and it works fine in the lead pickup, in my opinion. But I like the tonal options that you have with these single coil pickups here. So I love the pickup configuration of this. That's the same pickup configuration I did when I did the custom built guitar that I have. And here I've got 3 separate on-off switches for the 3 pickups, as opposed to a Strat 5-way switch or something. One of the things that'll do, of course, is you can do that staccato rhythm thing. It's not something that I'd use a lot, but it's kind of a cool effect when you do it. So, and there's really no other way to get it, or certainly not out of a 5-position switch. It's a little more involved with selectors like this to switch between, but not impossible. So there's the lead pickup is on, and then if I switch like this, now the neck pickup is on. So you do two at once to switch back and forth, but it's very doable. The other thing is I can turn 2 pickups on, or both lead and rhythm, or even all 3. So it, in some respects, gives me even a wider sense of tonal choices. Of course, in the recording for Speed Mechanics, I'm using the bridge pickup almost exclusively, but there was a few times that I did use some of the other pickups, and I do remember, don't know why I remember this, but for some reason, I think it was example 168 later in the book, where I had some rhythm tracks and I threw some leads down over it. If you listen to that one and you hear that tone, well, that was actually both the lead and neck pickup at the same time. It has a little bit of that neck pickup quality in it, but it also, has a lot of gain and sustain. So anyway, there's one case where I actually did use it. This is the original vibrato bar that's on here, and it's made by Kahler. Now, I don't know why Kahler never became as popular as Floyd Rose. I think it has something to do with the whole, marketing and the behind-the-scenes story of, what happened when. But really, in my opinion, the Kahler was a better system than the Floyd Rose. So both of them are floating vibrato systems, and the reason I'd say the Kahler is better is because it allows me to do everything that the Floyd does, more or less, but it's much more forgiving in regard to tuning. So, in other words, with a Floyd Rose, you've got this floating vibrato system, and so the tension of the strings is on one side, that's pulling the bridge up, and then you got the springs on the back of the thing, which are pulling it down, and it's balanced on a fulcrum, so that whole bridge moves up and down. Obviously, if you increase tension of the springs, it's going to pull the bridge down, and that's going to be against the tension of the strings. And on the other hand, and this is the problem, if you change the tension of the strings, then that bridge, if you increase, let's say you tune a string sharp, that's going to pull the bridge this way and send all the other strings flat. So with a Floyd, you've got this problem of tuning. It's a real beast to keep the thing in tune, or to retune it, and forget about changing tunings. If you want to go to drop D tuning, you're going to be retuning the thing, multiple times. It's a real hassle. Another thing that it causes, in addition to that, is if you do things like, you do an oblique bend. On a Floyd, when you do a string bend, that increases the tension of the strings, which pulls the bridge and sends everything flat. So right there, instead of just a bend, you actually then, to hit pitch, have to bend a little bit further than you would, without a floating vibrato system. And on top of that, when you do hit pitch, if you were going to do an oblique bend like I just did, the note that was not bent, that string is going to go flat on a Floyd. So now you've got a couple of choices. Well, you can avoid doing that, which isn't really acceptable, or you can make sure that when you do an oblique bend, you also learn how to bend the unbent string a little bit to compensate for the slack of what's happening due to the movement of the bridge. Or you can reach back here after you pick it and put your hand on the bridge and kind of figure out how much pressure to push against it to, keep it from moving. But all of those seem like serious hassle factor workarounds. And that brings me back to the Kahler. Well, the Kahler is a floating bridge, so I can do the same things where, I can pull up above pitch in the same way. So it's also a floating system, but for some reason, the Kahler holds its tuning much better. I can tune a string. The others will move a little, but not nearly as much as they do on the Floyd Rose. And because that problem, is diminished by probably 90% with the Kahler, I just find that in practical use, it's much better. I get the gain without the burden, and so Kahler's better. What can I say? And the next thing is the sustainer I have in here. This is a Sustainiac. I was connected with the guys who created the Sustainiac, and it's gone through many, many evolutions over time. But in the mid-'80s, I was actually teaching guitar at a music store, and the guy who was the original inventor of the Sustainiac started coming in and taking lessons from me, and then he was saying, hey, I'm working on this thing, and so it was a cool idea. And then I went with him and his business partner. They, a couple of engineers and guitar players, Alan and Gary, they took the Sustainiac to the NAMM show, and I was going and demonstrating it in the late 80s there. So I was connected with those guys and using their sustainers. In the 90s, this version of it came out, and Alan put it in for me, and I just love it. It's awesome. And I'll just explain real quick what a sustainer is, what it does. So when you play loudly, you set up a feedback loop. So specifically what that means is the strings vibrate, the magnetic pickup hears that vibration of the metal string in its magnetic field, transforms it into an electrical signal that gets sent to an amplifier, which amplifies it, powers the speaker, and that creates the sound at the speaker. Now, when that sound from that speaker is loud, it tends to set off anything in the area that hears that sound with a sympathetic vibration, meaning if anything can vibrate at the same frequency that the speaker is producing, it will cause, the sound waves will cause it to vibrate. And then we call that sympathetic vibration. Well, the thing that is in the room with the speaker is the guitar and the strings on the guitar, and they are vibrating at that same frequency because they're producing the sound at the speaker. So the sound waves cause those strings to continue to vibrate, and there's your loop, your feedback loop. So the speaker causes the strings to vibrate, the strings vibrate more, which causes the speaker to get louder, and we get a feedback loop. Usually it goes into a harmonic of some kind. And a sustainer basically does the same thing, but instead of through the amp and the speaker through the air back to the strings, here the loop is done mechanically right on the guitar. So what that means is a bit of the signal coming off of the lead pickup is tapped, and that signal is fed to this pickup. Well, a pickup is a transducer, and it can listen to the strings. That's how they're normally used. But if you put power to a pickup, it can also power, like a speaker, power the magnetic field and cause the metal strings that are in that field to vibrate. So it's kind of like using the pickup in reverse. And as we tap the signal and send it here and then power the very strings that are causing the sound to be created here at this pickup, well, there's your feedback loop. So there's a bit more to it than just the pickup, though. You have to have the circuitry that powers it, and there's two 9-volt batteries that power it. So that's here on the back. So what we had to do is route for the batteries and also route for the circuitry, which goes in here. On the other side, these two switches went in, and they come through from the circuitry side. These control the sustainer. So this is off, and I go up, that turns the sustainer on. And when it's on, this is a 3-position switch, and that gives you 3 different harmonic modes. I'll demonstrate this sustainer real quick. It's pretty cool. If I hit a note and then turn it on, I have infinite sustain. And the 3-position switch, which allows me to get different harmonics, or it tends to favor different harmonics, really. Basically, that tends to be the fundamental, which is where I had it. This tends to be a harmonic, and that's a higher harmonic. So you can see that the harmonics are very natural in the sense that as you go for a certain one or move between them, it will kind of gradually go into the harmonic, and exactly how fast it goes or which harmonic it goes to has a lot to do with, with the guitar itself and the resonances and the vibration. So it's not, necessarily also cut and dried as, this is always a fundamental, this is always an octave harmonic, and this is 2 octaves. It's not necessarily like that. Sometimes the other harmonics will come in. You might hear a major third here or there, or you might hear, a fifth. But much like natural feedback, you don't really have total control over that. You just kind of play with it, and because it's a harmonic, it always works, in some way. Here you basically just have what you'd have in a natural room with a loud amp, except you have just a little more control over it. And the real beauty, is that you have that infinite sustain, at the click of a button, instead of having to crank your amp up so loud. Now, the one thing, though, that I always hated about these floating systems is that they have this lock nut, this locking system here. Well, that's important because without that, of course, the strings are getting slack, and then they pinch on the nut. And yeah, you can put like a nut that's made of, I don't know, what is it, nylon or some graphite nut, or something that's a little more slippery and causes things not to bind. In many cases, maybe that's enough to work, but it's just such a hassle when you use the bar. You grab the thing and yank on it, and then start playing and notice that you're significantly out of tune. So the locking system, I think, is pretty essential. But the problem with them was that they always required, these Allen keys. So you're getting ready to play a show, and you break a string and warm up, and now you got to find your Allen key, dig it out, and in the dark probably get a flashlight, figure out what's going on, change your string. It's just a huge hassle to change strings, and even worse, frankly, on the Floyd, because now you got to cut the ends of the ball ends of the strings off and pinch them in this end. At least, again, the Kahler wins there because it has these places where you seat the ball end of the string right in, so you don't have to make any special modifications. Changing strings is quite a bit easier. But like I said, still the lock nut, is a bit of a hassle factor. So when that locking system finally broke on this guitar, I replaced it with one that had a finger tight system. So basically what it meant was you would push a clamp down, and there was 3 of them, similar to this one, but a little different. This is the newest one because that one also broke, which I'll get to in a minute. So the finger clamp system had these things I would pull up to loosen, and it would unclamp the strings. You could, route the string through, and then just push it down finger tight, and it would clamp again. Awesome system. Worked great until one day the guitar's sitting, and somebody bumps it, bang, it falls on its clamps, and they bust off. Now at that point, this had been my number 1 guitar, my main guitar, for probably almost 15 years. These frets were totally worn out. they were so bad that as I do vibrato, I could feel the dips in the fret. So it needed a fret job, and now it needed a new locking system. But the locking system, I couldn't find a replacement for. That company had gone out of business, and I certainly didn't want to go back to the original system, you know, the Allen key system, which is such a pain in the butt. So I just kind of put it on hold. I put the guitar in its case and thought, okay, well, I have to repair it at some point. I started playing other guitars, and a week turned into a month, turned into a year, and another year, and another year, and finally this guitar was just sitting for a number of years. Until one day I had the bright idea that it was time to resurrect the guitar. I brought it in to a luthier, and he did a fret job on the thing, and then I was talking to him about, let's do something really cool on this ugly brown, you know, face of this thing. And I wanted to do some kind of a mirror finish or something, and we kind of went round and round about it. One of the problems, of course, with doing a mirror is that, so you know, you get the thing, you break the mirror or whatever, and you glue it on here in pieces, but then of course it's very uneven, and you know, how do you know, what do you do to make it even? So I ended up throwing out that idea and just said, well, I'm just going to buy some spray paint and do whatever, you know, whatever I feel like. When I got a color I didn't really like how it worked, I'd cover it up with something else or scrape it off and start over. I think I did that a couple times. Parts of it I really do like, and you know, the spackles and such. But in any case, you know, whatever, it works. Kind of like the neon quality here, it's different, so that works for me. The final step was I replaced this with the only finger tight locking system I could find these days, which is this one that goes like this. So you loosen it in that direction, you tighten up the Allen keys to get them close, and then to clamp it down, you twist like that. Now, I don't like this one anywhere near as much as the ones that go in this direction. It doesn't look as good, and it's a little bit less flexible in terms of getting it set up just right so it locks, you know, well enough. But I mean, it does work. You know, you just have to mess with it a little bit just to get it, you know, in the zone with the Allen keys before you then, you know, do the finger lock. Anyway, the guitar is finally back in service, and it's cool because, you know, it's got that Kahler system. I don't see a lot of those around anymore, and I'm glad that I still have one. Also, the Sustainer, if that's something that interests you, I think it's an awesome invention, and I would encourage you to go check it out. You know, Google Sustainiac and go check out their website. It's definitely worth the bit of routing, in my opinion. If you have a guitar that you know, you're willing to experiment with, definitely give it a shot. Thanks for watching the Speed Mechanics for Lead Guitar. Be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. I'll see you in the next video.